Video game stories have come a long way in the past few decades. The earliest games had simple storylines that were just there to give some basic context to the gameplay. But over time, things developed. Before long, there were cutscenes and complex characters and intricate plots and entire universes full of ideas. But while gaming stories evolved, certain tropes kept popping up again and again, leading to some annoying cliches. And today I want to discuss the top 5 video game story cliches that I hate the most. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of Bad Parts, also the author of Entry Wounds, and welcome to my writing channel. So let's get to it. I'm going to talk about my 5 most hated video game story cliches. I'm going to explain why I hate them, and I'll give you some examples of each as we go. The number 5 cliche that I hate is when you have unstoppable heroes until there's a cutscene. So here's how this one works. In many combat-oriented games, you play as these unstoppable heroes who kill hundreds or thousands of enemies over the course of the game. These heroes, they tear apart their opponents, they shake off any counterattacks, and they make everything look easy until the game reaches a cutscene. Then, once the story kicks in, those unstoppable heroes become mortal again. All of a sudden, they get shut down, overwhelmed, or in some cases, even killed by enemies that normally would only cause minor problems for them. One example of this cliche comes from Final Fantasy X, and the plot in this game follows a star athlete and his friends who are trying to save the world from an endless cycle of destruction. About midway through the game, the heroes have to crash a wedding in order to prevent their friend Yuna from marrying one of the story's main villains. And in order to stop the ceremony, the heroes fight their way through a bunch of gun-wielding soldiers, one after another, until all of a sudden everything grinds to a halt because someone points a gun at them. And everybody acts like it's a big deal. Everybody acts like the heroes didn't just fight a bunch of soldiers and survive several gunshots along the way. It's a moment that just takes you out of the story. I could see if the heroes had run into a powerful magic spell, or if they had run into a weapon they hadn't seen before and they stopped because of that, but stopping for a gun that didn't faze them up till this point, it just doesn't ring true. The number 4 cliche that I hate, forced final bosses. Now, final bosses are a video game tradition. They usually represent the climax of the story, and when they provide the right challenge and emotional impact, they can create some of the most memorable moments in gaming. On the other hand, sometimes a final boss is shoehorned in there without proper regard for the story. Or worse yet, sometimes the final boss is this over-the-top parody of the main villain. And instead of concluding the story with impact, these forced bosses undermine all the build-up that came before them. Now, I'm going to take an example from Batman Arkham Asylum. If you haven't played this game and you don't want spoilers, you can skip ahead to the timestamp listed on the screen. Anyway, Batman Arkham Asylum was a groundbreaking game for its time. Not only did it introduce an addictive combat system, but it also featured a compelling story in which Mark Hamill's Joker takes over Arkham Asylum and forces Batman to intervene. The story is dark, it's grounded, and it takes itself pretty seriously until the final boss battle with the Joker. And that's where this one gets a little too cartoony for its own good. What happens is that after Batman defeats a number of the Joker's henchmen, the Joker then injects himself with a venom-like drug that turns him into, well, this thing. And whatever this thing is, it doesn't feel like a proper conclusion to the story. It feels more like a situation where the developers felt obligated to include this epic final boss battle, regardless of whether or not it fit with the story's tone. The number 3 cliche that I hate is when a video game story has too many MacGuffins. And just so we're all on the same page, what a MacGuffin is, it's an object, item, or event that motivates the characters, but is unimportant in itself. So MacGuffins, they will advance the plot, they may advance a subplot or a sub-story, but the MacGuffin itself, that item or whatever it may be, it's not something that the audience cares about. The characters within the story, they definitely care about it. They want to go after it, just like in Indiana Jones movies where Indy and the villains, they're all fighting to get the Lost Ark or the Shankara Stones or the Holy Grail or whatever it is. But the audience doesn't really care about those sort of things. The audience is just there to enjoy seeing what Indy does in order to get those things. Now, MacGuffins are everywhere in video games. Even games with well-respected stories like Uncharted, Mass Effect, and the recent God of War games are peppered with MacGuffins. You'll often have quests like, hey, find this special item in order to repair the elevator, or hey, find this computer terminal in order to unlock the door, or hey, find this magic key in order to open up the portal to where you need to go next. And these types of quests, these go here and get this thing we need type of scenarios, they tend to be pretty shallow in terms of story content. Obviously, you can have some great character moments promise along the way, but the actual plot objectives tend to feel uninspired. Now, one of my favorite games is Zelda Ocarina of Time, and this game is a MacGuffin factory. Early on, you have to find 3 spiritual stones. Then once you collect those, you have to find the 6 sages who give you the 6 medallions. And then don't forget, there's also the franchise's main MacGuffin, the Triforce, which is also at stake and up for grabs in this game. What really drives me nuts about the MacGuffins in Ocarina of Time is that whenever you collect a group of them, the villain Ganondorf just swoops in and takes credit for your efforts. For instance, when you collect the spiritual stones, he takes control of the Sacred Realm and he becomes the ruler of Hyrule. Then, once you round up the 6 sages, he captures Zelda the moment she comes out of hiding. It creates this weird dynamic that makes Ganondorf look like a lazy villain, and if you think about it, the land of Hyrule would probably be better off if you didn't collect the stones at all. The number 2 cliche that I hate is choices that don't matter. One thing that separates video games from other storytelling mediums is the ability to choose what direction the story goes in. Some games offer you minor choices like deciding what the hero says or how the hero acts, while other games offer you greater choices like deciding the fate of a character's life or the fate of an entire species. Choices, when done well, can enhance a game, but unfortunately choices in many games ultimately don't matter. Some games, for instance, offer dialogue options, but no matter what you say, those conversations will reach the same endpoint. Now, my biggest issue here is when you have games that make choice their key selling point, and yet those choices don't have any real long-term consequences. The Telltale Games are an example of this. If you haven't played any of these, they're basically TV episodes that you, the gamer, get to direct. You repeatedly pick what the main character says in order to advance the story. Then there are usually 3 to 5 major choices that you have to make in each episode. Now, the most famous Telltale game is The Walking Dead Season 1. This game won a bunch of Game of the Year awards because of its bold, emotional storyline. And it's set in the Walking Dead universe, but it has its own original cast of characters, so it's essentially a clean slate. And at the very end of the first episode, you have a major choice in which you can save one of 2 people during a zombie attack. You have to choose between one or the other. And whoever you choose survives, while the other person immediately dies. At first, this seems like a moment of significant impact, but no matter who you save, that person will eventually die in a later episode. So essentially, at the end of episode 1, you're not choosing who survives, you're choosing who will die at a specific moment later on in the story. And I realize it's a lot to ask of game writers to come up with all the different potential outcomes of what can happen as a result of choices, but when your choices all lead to the exact same payoff, the power of choice starts to lose its meaning, and the story itself loses some of its magic. And the number 1 video game story cliche that I hate is the silent protagonist. And I'm also going to include self-insert protagonists here as well, and I'll discuss them in a little bit. But first, let's talk about silent protagonists. And these, if you're not familiar with them, are when you have a main character who has no dialogue for the entire game, with the exception of maybe the occasional short phrase or battle cry. For example, Mario doesn't really talk in his games. He just kind of yells out catchphrases every now and then. Let's-a go, here we go, that sort of thing. And then Link from The Legend of Zelda, he's also a silent protagonist in his games, but he does get dialogue options in certain games in the franchise, which raises the question, well, is he really speaking? Is that actual dialogue? What's going on here? And that's what brings us to the idea of the self-insert protagonist. And these are semi-silent characters who are designed so that audiences will be able to imagine themselves in the character's place. Many games like Knights of the Old Republic give you the option to create your own characters from scratch, while other games have pre-made characters who are these self-insert protagonists, like Joker from Persona 5, who he's silent for the most part, but he has all these speaking options throughout the course of the story. Now here's the problem I have with this trope. When the hero is silent, that silence creates a disconnect between the character and the story. Remember, dialogue is a major storytelling element, and it's a critical part of human interaction. The words we choose and how we speak them, that indicates who we are as people, and it shapes the world around us. If a hero is interacting with people, I want to know what that hero is saying so that I can understand the hero better and understand the story better. Now, I'll admit that sometimes it makes sense to have a silent protagonist. For instance, in certain Metroid games, Samus is all alone on a hostile planet, so there's no person to really talk to, and that silence on her part adds to the game's atmosphere. Another example of this would be the recent Doom games, where the Doomslayer's silence characterizes him as this godlike force of destruction. But for the most part, this cliche creates awkward and unrealistic situations whenever the protagonist is being spoken to. Worse yet, the supporting cast is usually the ones who have to do all the heavy lifting when it comes to planning and decision making, and that makes the hero look passive at best and brain dead at worst. And don't get me wrong, I love Persona 5. It's probably my favorite game from the past 20 years or so, but it drives me crazy when Joker just sits there during group meetings. And then later on his friends act like he's this charismatic guy, this great leader. It doesn't feel honest, it doesn't ring true. And I believe the story would have been stronger had he been a more fleshed out character with genuine dialogue. You could still have dialogue options and you could still give the gamer a sense of choice, but at the same time, give us a more concrete sense of who Joker is. So I hope this helps. Question of the day. What is your most hated video game story cliche? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of either one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. And then Entry Wounds is great if you like thrillers. It's about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he cannot put it down until he kills 6 people with it. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe, and as always, remember to keep on writing.